I don't scare easily, and I'm not afraid. I'm unsuccessful if I did not live my values.
Welcome back to the Vibe with Kai podcast presented by Sucre Bay. Sucre Bay, the creators of our collaborative perfume, it's called Why Did I Walk Into This Room? It features notes of fresh baked cherry pie, light cinnamon, and absolute acceptance of who you are. Quite honestly, it's a gender neutral love letter to the ADHD community. You can check that out right now at sucrebay.com. Today, I am sitting down with my friend Kate Lowry. Kate is a CEO coach, a comedian, and the author of the incredible tactical guide, Unbreakable. But more than that, she's a whistleblower. We recorded this conversation while Kate was actively in the middle of a massive public lawsuit against a venture capital giant. She was targeted for having mental health disabilities and needing medical leave. Instead of taking a quiet settlement, she chose to take a stand, making this only the second employee lawsuit in venture capital history to go public. Today's episode is a heavy, real life, empowering conversation about fear based leadership, surviving toxic work cultures, and finding your agency when a company tries to make you feel small. We even talk about how cuddling her service dog, Annie, helps regulate her nervous system. And as always, during this interview, we did our special Reverse the Mic segment where Kate put me in the hot seat and got to ask me some very personal questions about my disabilities and how they make me stronger. If you are not subscribed and you are listening for free, this episode will skip over that Reverse the Mic segment, and it's only available for the exclusive cut for my subscribers. If you want to hear the answers that I have for Kate's questions, you need to subscribe. It's only $5 a month on Patreon and on Facebook. What do you get for that $5? Well, that $5 unlocks the full ADHD deep dive educational video library, plus private behind the scenes looks at my life and my mental health journey that I absolutely don't post on any public platforms. All right, my friends, let's get into it. Here is my conversation with the truly unbreakable Kate Lowry. I want to welcome my friend Kate Lowry back to the pod. I didn't scare you away. You're back. I'm so happy.
That's right. I am back. Thank you for having me.
You're doing something right now that sounds exhausting. Just reading about it on paper, right? So you're CEO coaching, you're writing comedy, you're protecting the environment. You and we'll get into this later. You filed a lawsuit recently as well. You're juggling all of these things, and these are all massive responsibilities. So, like, what what do you do just to keep your own vibe in check? Like, how are you calming yourself? How are you filling your own cup here?
Yeah, definitely. So first of all, what really helps is that everything that I'm doing has a lot of meaning to me. When the things that you're doing are really meaningful and purpose, I find that they don't make you as tired. But the world and, my life are pretty right now. And so when I find myself in chaotic places or states, I do a few things. I try to anchor on normalcy, right? Like, can I be mindfully present while I wash the dishes and fold my laundry? Can I play with my very silly service dog? Things like that. And then I
Yeah.
also try to really increase what people call like glimmers, which are the opposite of triggers. So, like a trigger is something that brings out, negative memories or emotions, and glimmers are something that bring out positives. So, if you had chocolate cake on your fifth birthday, and every time you have chocolate cake, it makes you think of that, then I might bake a chocolate cake on a Sunday. Or, if the smell of certain dryer sheets like makes me remember being, 10 years old, then I'll use those dryer sheets. And it can be as simple as that to add some positivity in your life to kind of balance out the stress.
Right, right. When I hear all the things that you're doing, like it's good that you like have that uh, down because I feel like that can drain a lot of battery for you sometimes. And we'll get into like all the things that you're doing in a minute. But like, is your energy management now different than it was, let's say, 5 years ago? Like, has it changed a lot?
Yeah, I think it has. The biggest thing is that my capacity has really expanded. Um, you know, I think a lot of people don't realize this, but when hard or difficult things happen to you, you can allow it to stretch you. Some people might call it post-traumatic growth, some people might call it something else, but every time something hard or difficult happens, my ability to tolerate hard or difficult things expand. And so I really try to focus on what's in my control, focus on what grounds me, find moments of gratitude, and then add in little moments of joy. And I think that that serves me better than maybe 5 years ago, where there would definitely have been more times where I would just be like, ah.
Sure, sure. Yeah. You have this really, really great quote that you wrote that I really love that I want to highlight for a moment. You said, "When you change the way that you look at things, the things you look at change." I love that quote. I love that. And it feels like for a lot of us, it feels like a survival tactic, in a way. Like is that like what can people take away from that quote? When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. Can you explain that and explain what people should get out of that?
Yeah, this is a quote that I've kind of kept with me since I was a child. And I think that what people don't realize is that they have permission to react in the way that makes sense to them, not how society tells them to react, right? So for example, I have a lot of difficult things that happen pretty frequently. So like let's one week, like my house was flooded. I got like a surprise like 40K bill
Yeah.
and my puppy ate a bunch of inanimate objects and had to go to the vet. And you look at that
Yeah.
you look at that and you go, "Ooh, yuck, yeah." But then when I think about it, my house being flooded means that I got a rapid course in home repair, right? I learned what's in the guts of my floors and my walls. I learned how repair works, and I ultimately made my house way more resistant to water damage, and that's really cool. And when I got this, like, huge extra bill, which, was some people's full income for the year, that really lit a fire under me to do business development. And I ended up with a bunch of clients that will provide way more long-term revenue than that. And then with my puppy, every time she eats something she's not supposed to eat, she gives me information about how I can make the home safer and more puppy proofed for her. And so every time that, she does something like that, it ends up making the home a safer place. And so when you look at that, you could go, "Oh, yeah, bad things," or you could go, "Huh, like the end result there was actually not so bad."
Right, right. I really love that mindset because sometimes we obviously have to look at ugly things. Like one of the things that we talked about last time, we're going to talk about again today, the fear-based leadership, which is something that you have studied and have such great insight on. And so I love that you mentioned changing how we look at things because when we talk about fear-based leadership, like we've identified that fear-based leadership isn't just sticking around, like it's trending. It is a way that people lead their companies and their groups and their organizations now. And I know we talked about this a little bit last time, but just for anybody that didn't catch that episode, why do you think that wealthy, powerful leaders right now are doubling down on fear instead of evolving?
You know, that's a tough question because I wish that what you're saying wasn't happening. I wish that the world was not tilting towards this fear-based leadership axis. But, across media, TV shows, House of Cards, Game of Thrones, across society and private, public, and social sectors, we're really seeing a lot of people saying, might makes right. I control everything. If you don't like it, get in line or get out. And they're doing this partly because they don't know how to be something different, and partly because they see it as a faster, easier way to put themselves on a pedestal around the people around them. If you tell someone, "Hey, I can teach you to ask nicely for a sandwich," or you can just grab the sandwich, people who have good values will will say, "Oh, of course, teach me to ask nicely." But people who just really want a sandwich will just grab it and run away. And that's kind of what we're seeing here is this low impulse control, high control need combining in a society where all of a sudden there's deep permission to take what you want. Other people be down.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned that right now we are in a cultural moment where people are essentially saying I am smarter, I am richer, so I matter and you don't.
Mhm.
There's a lot of people right now that are listening that feel small. They feel very small. How do we stop internalizing that message?
Yeah, definitely. Well, first of all, they're totally lying to you. There's this philosopher in Silicon Valley named Curtis Yarvin, and he basically says if you're wealthy and powerful, you matter, and everyone else below you doesn't. Every city and state should be run as a CEO dictatorship, and if you don't like it, I don't care because if you're not in those groups, I see you like as an NPC, like a complete non-entity. You don't have human rights. You don't deserve to exist. And the thing is, just because someone says you don't have human rights doesn't mean they can take away your rights. Um, and just because someone stomps their feet and goes, "I want to matter," and you don't matter, they can't take away you mattering. Just by you existing, you deeply matter. You matter to everyone around you. And every day in all of your interactions, you're touching other people. And every person that you interact with, you are inherently equal to just by existing. And so just because a big bad bully comes along and goes, you know, only me matters, screw everyone else, that doesn't mean that they can take your power away. It just means they want to. And you don't have to give it to them.
I want to talk about something that made my jaw drop. You noted that you were targeted specifically for having mental health disabilities. They essentially told you it wasn't, quote, fair to treat you like someone who didn't need medical leave. And that turns the idea of fairness into a weapon, I feel like. Can you unpack that twisted logic for us?
Yeah, it is twisted logic for sure. And as I allege in the legal complaint, the complaint says essentially, I had to take two medical leaves at my last employer, one for physical health, one for mental health. And um, the first time I got back from medical leave, as the complaint alleges, it states the head of HR said, I don't believe that, working here caused these issues. You're essentially a liar. I'm putting you on probation. If your new team doesn't like you after 3 months, we'll fire you. And then later that year, I ended up on a different team with a different manager. And when I came back from a second medical leave, they said, we're putting you on an alternate review cycle. And I objected to that. And when I did, as the complaint alleges, they said people who are on medical leaves are not worth the same as people who don't. Your ADA protected disabilities essentially make you a weaker employee. And we do this to everyone that goes on medical leaves. None of them get promoted because you're worthless. And you could work here for 40 years and not get promoted. And if you keep objecting, I'm going to cut your bonus in half. And when I did keep objecting, they, as the complaint alleges, ultimately cut my compensation by millions of dollars and then terminated me. And the fact that we live in a world where people say, yeah, where people say, your disabilities make you weak is inherently wrong because I believe that my disabilities actually make me strong. The fact that I have 7 or 8 doctor appointments every week means that I'm killer at time management. The fact that I'm used to managing a team of 15 doctors means that I am great at stakeholder management. And the fact that I constantly have to triage health issues means that my ability to prioritize is way higher than most executives. And so I think that, people who take actions like that fundamentally misunderstand that disabilities make you weak. Like, if anything, I think disabilities make people significantly stronger and better employees.
I agree wholeheartedly with that. And I know that a lot of my listeners are neurodivergent and and can understand exactly what you're saying. But we also we constantly worry that asking for accommodations will put a target on our backs. And you clearly have lived that nightmare. So I guess my question is, what does authenticity look like when it seems like the system is just actively punishing you for it?
Yeah, the system is. But, in this case, they may have tried to punish me. but ultimately it's them that are being punished because when people target people with disabilities, they lose great talent. They lose the diversity of the workplace that brings out the best ideas, the most innovative ideas. And in my case, I'm actively suing a former employer, and they have now had their names dragged through 180 press outlets that picked up the story, and they're becoming known as people who, have unsafe workplaces, and that's the risk, when you target people who believe that they are strong, who know that they are strong, who know that their disabilities are an asset, not a weakness. Um, Sometimes you end up poking bears that you don't expect. And I'm quite determined to hold people who say, I'm wealthier and more powerful than you, so I'm above the rules. I'm going to really hold them accountable, whether that's in the court of public opinion or in the court of law. And for all the people who feel like they can't do that, like, I want them to know that there are people who are taking on those fights and that, we stand for you.
And I want people to understand that what you're doing is rare. It's very rare. You had mentioned this is only the second employee lawsuit in venture capital history to go public. So why did you choose to go public and own the narrative instead of taking a quiet settlement and just disappearing like they probably want you to do? Why did you choose to go public?
Yeah, definitely. So I attempted every possible internal escalation path, every possible pre-litigation settlement path. And ultimately, um, what I found was there was very little willingness to come to the table. Because the thing is, I can't speak specifically for Insight, but organizations like this often think I'm big and powerful. No one will dare to ever sue me. They have a lot of tricks and tools in their back pockets. Um, they tend to think I'm so big and scary that I can blackball anyone in the industry. And so no one will dare to sue me because then they'll be unemployable. But in my case, I run a CEO coaching firm for mission driven and underrepresented founders. So a lawsuit like this is very on brand for me, and my CEOs fully support it. And that means that I'm able to take on the risk of a lawsuit without worrying about my reputation. Because at the end of the day, I don't want to work with people who don't want to work with me because I stood up for my values. And you could think of this as a litmus test of great, it's going to scare away all the people who are, maybe phony and we're just hanging around because of status.
That choice to speak up when history says stay quiet. I feel like that is where the real battle begins. And I want to kind of dig into that cost of that bravery because it is brave. You talk about agency and volition, but when you're up against a giant firm with unlimited resources, does agency ever feel like an illusion to you? And how do you find your power internally when the odds are seemingly mathematically against you?
Yeah, well, I don't scare easily, and I'm not afraid because to me, I'm unsuccessful if I did not live my values in over the course of a day. I don't tie my success to how much money I make, what my title is, whether I have a fancy house or a fancy car. My success is 100% based in do I love and like myself? And am I living my values? And it is extremely hard to intimidate someone like that because I know that I can do great work. I know that I can always make more money if I need to make more money. And I think that the arrogance that I see in corporate spaces means that people like me get significantly underestimated when it comes to fights like this. And I love to be underestimated because you can always turn that specifically to your advantage. But there are real risks. There are risks financially, there are risks safety-wise, and, it is true, like, when you're going up against a $100 billion fund that's backed by sovereign wealth funds, it's almost like invoking the ire of a nation.
Yes. 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 And so it's amazing because you are fighting for disability rights in one of the most elite exclusive industries in the world. And so like, even with all of this going on, I guess the hopeful side of me is like, do you think that the tech industry and the venture capitalist industry, do you think they're even ready to accept disabled leaders? Or do you think they're still just looking for those superhumans who never sleep and work, 72 hours a day? Are they even ready for that?
I think there actually are a lot of disabled leaders in the industry, but I think they hide it. And I'm trying to make it more okay for them not to hide it. Um, but this doesn't just affect people who are disabled. I've also heard of it affecting people who went on maternity or paternity leaves, who are just, going about daily life trying to be who they want to be, whether their parents are disabled or anything else. And I think that it's, really critically important that people understand that no matter what industry they're in, disabled people do exist and they will exist. And even if you want to keep them out, they're going to find a way back in because disabled people have the same dreams, hopes, ideas, aspirations as anyone else. We just have a little bit of extra spiciness that makes their life a little bit more interesting. And I I think that, you know, whether it's any aspect of my identity, disabilities or anything else, I would encourage people to remember that there are 100 different parts of themselves, and all of them are equally valid. And if someone tries to define you by saying, you're disabled and you're weak, you can say, yeah, I am disabled, and I'm also queer, and I'm also an artist, I'm also a writer, and, all of these other things, so that if they target that one part of you, you're not threatened because you are always, containing multitudes.
I would imagine there's a massive grief process here for you. You talked earlier about like especially like the money you could have made, and all of that. Like grieving, I feel like there's a part of you that's maybe grieving the career that you thought you'd have at that firm, grieving the safety of privacy. How do you process that grief without letting it turn into bitterness, I guess?
Yeah, I'm not a bitter person. I understand that bad people do bad things. There will always be bad actors in the world, and bad actors don't tend to like people who are deeply authentic. And so when they misbehave, I know it's not about me. I know it's about their insecurities. And I feel disappointed that they aren't living up to their potential. I feel disappointed that they aren't being better than they are. And I pity them because, they might have billions of dollars, but I don't think they have the same self-worth, and, that makes me sad for them, and so there is some grief in that every time you lose a specific future, there's something to process about that, but when one dream dies, it makes room for new dreams, and I think that, I've heard from hundreds of people since I started this lawsuit, and many of them were plaintiffs who had to settle privately or plaintiffs who were pressured into dropping their suits. And I think that being able to stand for people like that in a public way is probably more important than just being another venture executive.
You said that your greatest wish is for people facing bullies to know that they are more powerful than they realize. I know that there's a lot of people listening right now that would love to push more, but they're sometimes terrified of losing things like their health insurance if they speak up and all of that. So for those people that are terrified of taking any sort of action, what do you think is the first tiny step towards reclaiming their power?
I think that people need to outline what is in their control because so often the environments around us are telling us, you are nothing. There's nothing that's in your control. I own you. You are mine. Resistance is futile. And so I would start by saying, you know, even little things. I control how I react when people treat me badly. I control, how I choose to be around people. And even when they are not being their best selves, I'm going to be my best self. And I think that keeping careful logs, evidence of things that people do wrong, so that if someday you are in a place to challenge them is also very helpful. But it's most important for people to not let others tell them who they are. And they should not feel guilty for not being able to challenge bad actors. Because there are life circumstances, whether it's that you need to be able to afford your mortgage so your kids stay in their school, or, you really need health insurance. And so that is something you just have to stick around for a while. There's no shame in that. You shouldn't feel bad because right now, social systems are conspiring to give us very hard constraints. And so know that you aren't defined by those constraints. You're defined by how you respond to them.
You had mentioned that rapid change is happening in business and culture, and I think that's very true because I think we see it every day. And I guess it feels like a whiplash of sorts. So how do we how do we stay grounded in our values when it feels like the rules of the game are just constantly changing every single day, especially in 2026? How do we stay grounded?
Yeah, so the rules have completely changed. Like we have been in a particular world order for a long time, and now we are in a very different, less rules-based world order. We're in a world order that is about dominance and power and is less about civility. And so first, like you need to learn the new skills for that world order. So that's where all the toolkits in my book, which is a tactical guide called Unbreakable about how to thrive under fear-based leaders is really important. Um, but in terms of how to stay grounded, this means that every time you feel like you want to isolate, send 5 texts to your community. Every time that you like want to go home and like hide under your bed, go to your community garden, go to your cooking class. It means that when your kids come home and they're worried about something they heard on the news, you take them out for a special breakfast or dinner at IHOP, and you build family traditions that center around your small world and what is in your control. Because right now, we're really in this environment where there are hard things happening, and it's a bit of a pull onto your hat and hang on tight. But remember that you can always put your feet on the ground, and as long as you keep them there, they will stay there.
I think that grounding is essential. Like if we don't have a plan, then we get swept away. And if that plan is talked about a lot in the book that you just mentioned in Unbreakable. And like you said, it is a tactical guide. And for anybody that's interested, the link for that book is going to be in the show notes for this episode. So all you have to do is click. And so what you just described, like some of those, I guess, tactics that you just described just now, for the listener that's currently staring at a Slack message or a Teams message from a fear-based boss, are those some of the tactics that they should use today to protect their peace?
Yes, definitely. Absolutely. Um, Fear-based bosses operate on a different radio channel. It's like the employees are on FM and the fear-based boss is on AM. And so you have to learn the tools to get on their radio channel so you can understand what they're actually saying. Because they might say, "This report is terrible. I want to rip up the whole thing. Have a new one to me in 2 hours." And the employee might say, "But that's impossible. It took 2 weeks to build." Blah blah blah. And that's not the response the fear-based leader wants. So you have to learn essentially de-escalation techniques and ways to preserve your agency and autonomy so that you can protect what you care about, even under these highly difficult people. And that is a very, very different skill set because it is not open. It is not collaborative. It is protective. It's kind of like, everyone is trained to jog and run a half marathon, but all of a sudden they have to switch to self defense. Self defense is a really different skill set than running a half marathon.
Right. You personally help people make sense of difficult realities.
Mhm.
When reality feels overwhelming, is there a specific exercise that people can use to get clarity?
Yes. I think that there are many exercises that people can try, but it starts with somatic regulation um, and helping your nervous system. down regulate enough that you can process information without overwhelm. And so I would encourage doing that first. There's an exercise where you cross your hands and then twist them and cross your feet. It's an EMDR exercise that activates both sides of your brain. You could think of it as giving yourself a hug. So I would start by crossing your hands, twisting your arm, crossing your feet, and then taking some really deep breaths. Um, and then from there, think about what you really need to know. Um, think about the ways that you best receive information. If you find the New York Times homepage very overwhelming, then listen to Seth Meyers once a day for 10 minutes, right? Um, and really, yeah, really, really jack up everything that comforts and stabilizes you. Because when we're dealing with intense onslaughts of very difficult information over and over again, you essentially need to understand, how wide your aperture for receiving information is, and then give yourself extra downtime. So, make your favorite comforting soup, watch your comforting TV shows that are reruns. Try to limit how many new things you're trying right now. Because what I have found is that people have varying capacities for the unexpected and for what I would call like newness, experiencing newness. Because this is why people find airports stressful. They're in new places, then they're going new places, and they don't know what to expect. And so try to give yourself as much as you can of what you know, what to expect while processing unexpected things.
Hearing you talk about, things like giving yourself a hug and finding good ways to calm yourselves, it reminds me of what you were saying earlier about, cuddling your service dog, whose name is Annie, I believe. And I know there's a lot of my listeners and people that watch this that have pets. I'm one of them. You probably at some point have seen them running around in the background of my screen. They are my best friends, and I don't know where I would be without them. And my cats just have a way of just knowing when I'm just like in a mood, and they just always for some reason just take the right actions. Like I might be sitting on the couch and I'm just like maybe I had a rough day, and like they'll just come over and just like cuddle. Like they won't like be annoying or anything. They won't like be crazy. Like they'll just come over and just like lay their head on my lap. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm so thankful for you. And so I think it's important for a lot of us who have pets, especially to have like that non-human support system when the humans in our professional life are letting us down. you know, can you talk a little bit about how important your non-human support system is?
Yes, definitely. So humans are having a moment right now. This regulation's kind of at an all-time
Yes,
high.
we are. We are having
Um,
a moment. Give us a moment, people. Give us a moment. We're we're going through some stuff right now.
yeah, so basically, like, 90% of the people I run into are a bit like, 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 they're just, really having a hard time. And so that's where we have to remember that humans are meant to co-regulate with other mammals. And so if you have a dog, if you have a cat, if you have a bunny, whatever you have, I would really encourage you to spend extra time with them. One of my favorite things is if you have a dog, I sometimes recommend that my clients, if they're really stressed, lay down and put their head on the dog's chest and listen to the dog's heartbeat and then try to slow their own breathing and, match their dog's heartbeat. Um, but same thing with cats. Cats purring is very deeply calming, and pets can be a bit of a weighted blanket of sorts. So if you're having a really hard time, have your cat lay on your chest or you know, pull your dog on top of you and make them into your own weighted blanket because um essentially people are used to having certain footholds and handholds in society. They're used to knowing how things work. And right now, we're in periods of super tremendous change. And it can make people feel like they're spinning and like they can't grab on to anything because the rules are different. And so when you feel like you're spinning, I recommend increasing proprioceptive input, which tells your body where it is physically in space. So whether that's laying under a weighted blanket or putting a heating pad on your chest or having, your puppy snuggle with you, um, it can physically tell you where you are, which helps you, I think, more psychologically feel like you know where you are.
I love that. I'm definitely gonna cuddle with my cats today after you instructed me doctor's orders to cuddle with my cats. I guess I'll take your suggestion and I will happily do that with no problem. um, we have reached the point of the episode today, my friend, where there's a segment called "Reverse the Mic," where I turn the microphone over to you, and you get to ask me up to 3 questions, anything that you like, and I have to answer that. And that this is an exclusive segment for my Patreon and Facebook subscribers. So if you are not a subscriber and you want to view this segment and other segments like it, and also get exclusive access to my ADHD deep dive library of 10 to 15-minute videos where I deep dive into ADHD topics, make sure you go subscribe on Patreon for it's only $5 a month. Same thing on Facebook. It's only $5 a month, and you get exclusive access to stuff that I don't post anywhere else, including this segment, Reverse the Mic, where my guest gets to ask me any question that they like. So, with that said, Kate, I turn the microphone over to you. This is Reverse the Mic. It is now the Kate Lowry Show. I'm so happy to be a guest.
Well, thank you for being on my show, Kai.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my god, I love it. One of the I have two more things for you. And the first is I want to talk about Unbreakable. Where can people find your book Unbreakable? And what can they get out of it as they read it?
Yes, definitely. So, Unbreakable: How to Thrive Under Fear-Based Leaders is a tactical guide of how to navigate the new world order. It teaches people how to retain agency and autonomy in the face of high control, adverse environments. And right now, the world is just really being plunged into that. So please, do what you can to protect yourself. Like, pick up a copy and help make sure that you're able to protect yourself, and the people that you care about.
I love that because you're showing us that being quote unbreakable is it's not ever about never feeling pain. It's just about refusing to let the pain silence you. And I think that's a really important thing for people to hear. My last question for you, Kate, and I ask this of all of my guests. If there's one thing that you want people to take away from this episode today, what is that one thing?
I think it would be that our differences make us stronger, and they should be celebrated, not suppressed. And if anyone is making you feel less than because you are different in any way, know that it's because of their own insecurities, and it's about them, not about you.
I love that. I love that. Thank you, Kate, for hanging out with me again today. I'm gonna have you back now. Like third time's a charm. So this was number two. I got to get you back for number three.
I would love that. Thank you so much for having me, Kai.
That conversation really put things into perspective. Hearing Kate talk about how she refuses to let a massive, wealthy company strip away her humanity is exactly the kind of authentic, anti toxic positivity that we need here right now. The biggest takeaway for me was her reminder that our differences and our disabilities actually make us stronger. And anyone who tries to tell you otherwise is just dealing with their own insecurities. Please make sure you check out the show notes right now and get your copy of Kate's book, Unbreakable. All of her website and social links are down there in the show notes, so please go show her some love. Another huge thank you to Sucreabeille for presenting this episode of the podcast. Head on over to sucreabeille.com to grab our signature scent called Why Did I Walk Into This Room? If you're looking for more free content, head over to thevibewithkai.com where you can read my blog, check out my mental health resources hub, and join my free email newsletter. If you want to get deeper within this community, join the ADHD Vibers Hub on Patreon or Facebook for just $5 a month. With that subscription, you'll get exclusive access to the Reverse the Mic segment that I did with Kate, the ADHD Deep Dive video library, and personal behind the scenes looks into my private life and my mental health journey. Finally, please make sure that you're following me on all of your favorite social media platforms at The Vibe with Kai. Also, make sure you leave a review for this episode and share this episode with someone who might be dealing with a toxic boss right now. Once again, thank you so much for watching and for listening. As always, my friends, much love, good vibes. I'll catch you next time. Bye.